Good evening. Thank you for being here. I am Andrew Friedson. I currently serve as the president of the county council, serving in a one-year term on the county council. I also chair the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee on the council, and I represent District 1 on the council, which is predominantly Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Potomac on the council as the District 1 district council member. I did want to acknowledge and appreciate some colleagues who are here with us tonight. We have Council Vice President Kate Stewart, who does a great job representing this community and this district. She is your local council member. We have at-large council member Evan Glass, who lives in Silver Spring and is a neighbor of yours. We have council member Kristen Mink, who's here, who represents the East County. And we also have some planning board members. You're going to hear from the chair of the planning board, Artie Harris, in a minute. We also have Josh Linden and James Hedrick, who are here as well. Thank you for joining us as well. We are really going to hear tonight, as mentioned, also from the planning director, Jason Sartori, who's going to do a brief presentation so we can discuss what we are here to talk about. But really the focus of tonight is to hear from you. This is one of several listening sessions that we will be doing throughout the county in different communities throughout Montgomery County. This is a series of recommendations that were transmitted to the council this past spring after working on attainable housing strategies for the last few years. The Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee held 3 briefings over the summer on the recommendations, and the goal was to provide time for us at the council to digest the various different recommendations and also to provide an opportunity for the public to digest and understand the recommendations. I want to be clear, there is no legislation that's currently before us at the county council right now. We have recommendations from the planning board that have been submitted to us. These listening sessions are not public hearings on any proposed legislation. If and when the council introduces legislation related to attainable housing strategies, there will be a formal process at that point that includes public hearings. This is in addition to and above and beyond any requirement as part of the standard legislative process. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. So we're not here to discuss a policy proposal that is going through the legislative process before us at the moment. We are talking about recommendations that have come forward from the planning board to the council on attainable housing strategies. So I just want to make sure that we understand that. The purpose of these listening sessions is to hear from you and collect feedback, so we're going to be brief in our introductory comments. I'll note that Pam Dunn, who is a council senior analyst, will be staffing this issue. She's here as well to listen to what is said, and after the listening sessions have been held, council staff will gather the feedback from all the sessions as well as feedback that has been submitted via the web, and we will share it with all council members. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that. The topic that we're here tonight to discuss is a serious one. It is a deeply personal one for many of our families and many of our residents, and it's something that the council and the county have been working on for a while. We all know people who can't afford to buy a home in Montgomery County, whether it's your neighbor, your child's teacher, your kids who finished college and entered the workforce. The reality is there is not a single person who grew up in Montgomery County like I did who with the same job and the same career could afford to live in the same home as their parents or their parent. And that is something that we have been working on to address. This is not a panacea that will solve all of those challenges and all of those problems, but it is one tool in the toolkit that the planning board has presented to us in a series of recommendations and proposals to address it. I'm not going to spend time here tonight to talk about all the other aspects of housing that the council has worked on over the last several years. We have done quite a bit and continue to do quite a bit. There will be a time and place to talk about that. Happy to follow up if anybody has any questions. but this is intended to be one of many proposals and issues that we take up in order to address a serious housing challenge that we face, like so many other suburban and urban jurisdictions around the region and throughout the country. The details, as I mentioned, have yet to be formalized and worked out, and again, proposed via a formal legislative vehicle. Right now, we do have these recommendations, and we do want to hear from you. So this is really the beginning, even before the formal legislative process, certainly not the end of the legislative process. So we want to take as much time to hear from you as possible. We're going to turn it over to the Planning Board Chair, Artie Harris, to give very brief remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Director Sartori to walk us through a brief presentation so we know what we're here to talk about, and then we're here for the most important part, which is to hear from you.
Good evening, and thank you, Council President Friedson. I'm Artie Harris, Chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board, and I live nearby in Tacoma Park. The Planning Board, just for you to know, the Planning Board is an independent agency within the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, also called MNCPPC. The Planning Board members are appointed by the 11-member County Council. The Planning Board incorporates community input and the expertise of Montgomery Planning and Montgomery Parks to make independent and informed decisions that will enhance the quality of life within our neighborhoods. We're guided by our new general plan, Montgomery Thrive 2050. A core theme is providing more housing of all types for all people. In June, the board approved and transmitted to the County Council the Attainable Housing Strategies. As Council President Friedson said, this is just one of the tools we can use to help address a big housing shortage in our county. We are not building enough housing fast enough to keep up with demand or anticipated growth. This crisis threatens our economic viability and quality of life. Our middle class is shrinking. 26,000 middle-income earners have left the county since 2005. They are moving out of the county to places where there is more affordable housing and more available housing, or families just aren't simply moving to Montgomery County because of this. This includes teachers, firefighters, or even our own children and grandchildren who want to build their careers and start families in Montgomery County but can't find housing here. We can do better. Attainable housing strategies alone won't solve all our housing problems, but can help by allowing more flexibility to build more housing, and specifically more types of housing along our county's major corridors. These proposals address the county's urgent need for housing, especially for people and families who have too much income to qualify for affordability programs, but still struggle to afford to live in Montgomery County. To be clear, this proposal is not a mandate for people to turn their properties into duplexes. It would simply provide property owners a path to build something else aligned with the county's existing character and give more people options to stay here. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Director Sartori.
Hello, there we go. All right, thank you. So again, just a real quick introduction. I'm Jason Sartori. I'm the director of the county's planning department. And before I begin and talk about attainable housing strategies, I thought I'd share my housing story with you all. As an adult, I've lived in a couple of different garden-style apartments outside of Richmond, Virginia, outside of Providence, Rhode Island. I then moved to a small apartment building that had 6 apartments in it in Somerville, Massachusetts, for those of you who are familiar with the Boston area. Then moved down to Baltimore, where I lived in the heart of downtown Baltimore in a high-rise apartment before my wife and I moved to Montgomery County in 2002, where we bought our first house, a townhouse near Forest Glen, the Forest Glen Metro Station. And we lived there for 7 years before we moved to our single-family detached home that we now have in Bethesda. And so I would encourage you, as you provide your comments and thoughts on the proposals that recommendations we've prepared, to share your housing story to the extent that you feel comfortable, and also do it quickly so that we can hear from as many people as possible. So, all right. So I'll begin with the history here. Actually, we could go back real quickly. I just want to point out this QR code, if you scan this, it'll bring you to this PowerPoint presentation. So you can follow it on your phone or have it for posterity too. All right, next slide. So just to start about where we began with this, in March of 2021, the County Council requested that the Planning Department and Planning Board consider and recommend, quote, zoning reforms that would allow greater opportunities for missing middle housing in Montgomery County. The resulting effort became known as Attainable Housing Strategies. An important thing to note about this was that the original expectation was that we would be sending our recommendations to the council in about 2 months. And so here we are now, more than 3 years later. Just earlier this year, we finally sent our recommendations to the council. The nice thing about this is that extra time afforded us the opportunity to talk to more people from other jurisdictions that are undergoing similar efforts, to talk to more people within Montgomery County through a number of different engagement efforts, and to do more research and to hone the recommendations as much as we possibly could. So when we did start the project, we identified 3 primary goals that you see here. The first was to increase opportunities to meet the county's diverse housing supply needs. If you look around Montgomery County, we primarily have single-family detached and multifamily high-rise. However, our residents have a much more diverse set of needs and at different stages of life, and in different cultures and different needs in terms of housing, and this is an opportunity for us to try to create more of that diverse type of housing in the county. The second goal was to unravel the exclusionary aspects of the county's single-family residential zones. And I've got some data that'll show that every single neighborhood in Montgomery County is becoming more and more exclusive. And the third was to create more opportunities for homeownership for more households in more parts of the county. So why are we doing this now? And first, and it's not on this screen, I have to say we still have our obligation to the County Council. They requested that we do this and send our recommendations, and so that's why we've been working on it. But also, we now have Thrive Montgomery 2050 adopted. That is our new general plan that was adopted just about 2 years ago. And it creates a framework and policy guidance for us to be talking about diversifying our housing stock. Now, I want to point out that Thrive was not the first policy document that the county had that called for this. In fact, in 2011, the county adopted our housing element to our then general plan. This was a requirement by the state. And that housing element had used some of the same language that we have in Thrive in terms of trying to diversify our housing stock. Another reason is we're not alone. There are many other jurisdictions all across the country that are doing the same exact thing, looking at ways to, among many different tools, to tackle the housing crisis that we're in by looking at how we can open up single-family zones for more diverse types of housing. We know about Arlington right across the river, but there are other places. I've heard recently Prince George's County's talking about this. Minneapolis, obviously, Oregon, but also Massachusetts, places in Texas, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Montana, places all across the country are doing exactly what we're doing here. Next is the county has a significant housing supply issue. Just even a modest increase in the housing supply can help offset the trends that we're seeing in the lack of affordability in the county. And then lastly, there's a significant equity component. This is just the right thing to do. Now, the planning department has its planning agenda for equity agenda for planning. And as part of that, we have acknowledged the role that our policies and our plans historically over generations and decades have played in the racial inequities that we have in Montgomery County. What we're doing with attainable housing strategies is trying to find ways to bring down some of those barriers, remove some of those barriers, and create more opportunities for people who have been traditionally disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged, to have more opportunities here in Montgomery County. So I'm going to show a few data points that help tell the story about why we're doing this. So this shows the average size of a single-family home by decade built. And so hopefully this is a little bit clear. It's a little clearer on the PDF that you're looking at on your phones. But basically, the main point is that if you look over here, currently, homes nearly 4,000 square feet on average. That's 2.5 times what homes were built, the homes built from the 1950s are. So when we're seeing a lot of older homes that are being torn down and being replaced, they're being replaced with homes that are 2, 3, in some cases 4 times larger than the homes that were originally there. And there's an impact that size has on price. So before I show you some of the price distributions here, I just want to highlight this top line. In 2023, the average single-family home, detached home in Montgomery County sold for $970,000. And that is compared to $440,000 for an attached home, your townhouses and condos. So this is the distribution of those home sales. The blue represents our single-family detached home sales in 2023. And you can see they're on the far right side, the high end of this spectrum. The green, these are our townhouses. They're starting to come down. And then finally here, these are condos. Again, you can't see it here. The orange, reddish is our condos and co-ops. And you can see that they're obviously concentrated further down on the lower scale, lower end of the scale. This is to, again, emphasize that size and the fact that these are attached versus detached has an impact on pricing. Now, there's some people have pointed out that we're talking about average, not median. So we were able to find this out. The median single-family detached home in 2023 sales price was $875,000. Townhouses, $525,000, and condos, $315,000. Okay, so I talked about how every single neighborhood is becoming more and more exclusive. And so this is some data that we've shown before. This is updated, so some of you, this is new. You are the first people to be seeing this with updated data. What we're looking at here is this zip code, 20910, Silver Spring. If you took the typical home from the year 2000 and simply increased the price based on inflation, the price today would be $351,000. So the typical home in the year 2000 here would be $351,000. But the actual typical home today is $692,000 in this zip code. And I say today, it's 2022. This is the latest data that we have to work with. So I just want to highlight when we bring the next. Go to the next one there. So we've seen this in every single zip code. Burtonsville is where we saw the lowest increase, from 314 to 446. And 20815 in Chevy Chase, homes there, the typical home is now 1.3 million, over 1.3 million. So what does that mean in terms of how much income you need to have to comfortably afford these homes? Again, this zip code, to afford the typical home from 2020, today you would need $78,000 annual income. But what you actually need is about twice that, $154,000 to afford the typical home today. In Chevy Chase, it's nearly $300,000. Another way to look at this, not seeing the numbers, okay. So Lisa, if you're seeing those, you could tell me, I just want to make sure I have, actually I know these. So in 20910, what percentage of households in the county, not in the zip code, but in the county, could afford to live in the typical 2000 home? It would be 67%. It was 2/3 of today's households could afford to buy the typical 2000 home in this zip code, but today, in reality, it's only 38%. And we're seeing this again in every single zip code. Spencerville, which is near Burtonsville, is where we saw the smallest decrease. It was an 11% decrease in families, households that can afford to live in Spencerville. And Tacoma Park is where we saw the largest decrease, just eked out 20910. This went from 70% to 38%. So now, today, only 38% of the county's households can afford to live, thank you, okay, thank you, can afford to live in those two zip codes. So what are we proposing? Just want to highlight kind of the idea here of what you can do and what you can't do today. So on the left-hand side, this is an example of a tear-down, rebuilt, single-family home in Montgomery County. So today, you can tear down a smaller home and build something like this in 1/3 of the county. This is by right, meaning you can go to the Department of Permitting Services and say, I'd like a demolition permit, and I'd like a building permit, and you can get approved to do this. What you can't do is build a house, a structure that's the same exact size, same height, same setback from the road, same setback from the neighboring properties, and have it be 2 units. Can't do that anywhere. So, talk about our recommendations, but I want to give some context to certain geographies. So hopefully you can see here, we're talking about 4 different single-family zones. We've got the R40, R60, R90, and R200, and it's all the areas you see in yellow. The darkest is the R40. We only have a little bit of that near Tacoma Park and then Wheaton. And then R60 is the next darkest. And then the next one here is R90. And then the one that's the lightest and is a little more spread out, that's the R200. Those are larger lot properties. You'll also hear us talk about the Thrive Montgomery 2050 growth corridors. These were not corridors that were identified as part of attainable housing. These are identified in Thrive, in the county's general plan, as the areas, the corridors where we want to concentrate growth over the next several decades. This did come out of attainable housing, and that you'll hear us talk about the priority housing district. This is, and I'll talk in a second about exactly how these apply, but these are areas that are a 1 mile straight line buffer from our Metro, Purple Line, and MARC rail stations, and a 500-foot buffer from the center line of those corridors. Again, only what you see in yellow, the areas that meet those 4 zones. Our recommendations come at 3 scales and 3 different methods and approaches to tackling them, and then 3 geographic areas. So the first one, the small scale, this is where we're talking about duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. And we're talking about doing that, again, within the same height limits, setback requirements, and lot coverage limits that we currently have for single-family homes in those same zones. Which zones? Again, the R40, R60, and R90, our recommendations would allow duplexes and triplexes everywhere in those zones, and quadplexes within that priority housing district. For the R200 zones, duplexes would be allowed everywhere, and triplexes and quadplexes would be allowed in the priority housing district. And again, this would be by right, with one caveat. You would have to be in conformance with what we're referring to as a pattern book. So the pattern book essentially is a graphical representation of the zoning code and standards. So what you're seeing here is it would identify for each of the different zones and for a variety of different parcel sizes and shapes, we would identify how you could place a building, a duplex, triplex, or a quadplex, on that property, accommodate on-site parking, have what the massing would look like, how you would, the setbacks, how it would kind of interact with the street, and then other neighborly house details, how you could potentially put in sunrooms and porches and things like that. So the medium scale is where we're talking about a little bit more density, slightly larger buildings. Here we're talking about townhouses or stacked flats, 2 over 2, so these are 2-story units on top of 2-story units, and then small apartments. Here we're focused only on the R60 and R90 zones, and only within 500 feet of one of those Thrive corridors. The recommendation here, though, would require more review by planning and county agency staff, and potentially even by the planning board, because it would be handled through what we refer to as an optional method of development. Through the optional method, a property owner can get more density in exchange for providing a public good or benefit. In this case, the public good or benefit is smaller units that are more affordably priced. And then lastly, the large scale. The large scale is where we're talking about greater density along the corridor, specific portions of the corridors. However, we're recommending that this be handled through the master plan process. We're talking about actually rezoning areas away from those those single-family residential zones and creating a new set of zones for corridors that capture the vision and concepts that we have in Thrive. We don't have those zones, they don't exist yet, so this would be a process that we would have to undergo to create those zones, and then it would be through the master plan process that these would be applied to specific areas along our corridors. One other thing I want to mention before I conclude is one of the recommendations within the priority housing district is a reduction in the minimum parking requirements. So today, any unit, it requires 2 on-site, off-street parking for each unit. So if you were building a duplex today, if you could, you'd be required to build 4 parking spaces. The planning board's recommendations say outside the priority housing district, if there's no street parking available, there'd be no reduction in parking minimums. You'd still have to build your 4 spaces for a duplex. If there is street parking, the planning board suggests a 50% reduction, which would mean you'd only need 2 spaces. If you're inside the priority housing district and there's no street parking, then a 50% reduction, 2 spaces. And if there is street parking, then a 75% reduction, meaning only 1 space. The idea being that inside those priority housing districts, that's where we have more alternative options for transportation. We have more bike facilities, it's more pedestrian oriented, we have access to transit. This is also not saying you can't build more parking. It's just saying we're not going to require it based on these standards. All right, so the last thing, we're obviously here today, September 11th in Silver Spring, this beautiful building, by the way, my first time in here. Tomorrow night we're up in Wheaton. We've got another session next week in White Oak, and then 2 the week after that in Germantown and Bethesda, and then a virtual one during the day on October 2nd. And one last thing that I want to bring your attention to when we're talking about schedules and calendars is the planning board's been holding a housing speaker series, and the next one is next Thursday at our headquarters in Wheaton. I encourage people to come out. You can come, we can watch it on our website if you don't want to come in person. It'll also be recorded and available on our website. Next week's topic is actually featuring several people from other jurisdictions across the country who have done exactly what we're doing here today. So I encourage you to come out for that. With that, I think we're ready to go.
Great, thank you. Could I just ask, let's hear it. Lisa, can you put the QR code back up? I think that was taken down very quickly and folks didn't get a chance to snap a picture. Just note, if you want to pull up the presentation with the QR code, I'm going to leave it up there. Ask Lisa to leave it up there for a few minutes. And also note, if you signed in, hopefully everybody signed in with your email address, we will send you information, including links, via email. There's also some paper versions in the back, but we will send electronically as well. So please make sure, if you haven't already, that you sign in before you leave with your email address. I just quickly wanted to acknowledge Councilmember Balcom has some representatives here. If you could raise your hand. Thanks for joining us. We also have Rockville Councilmember Barry Jackson. I think I saw walk in, and former Councilmember Tom Hucker, who previously represented this community. Thank you all for joining us. We're now going to open it up to questions, the real reason, and comments. The real reason why we are here. If you could raise your hand if you're interested in speaking. We have council staff. Marshai is going to walk around and hand you the microphone so you can ask your question. We would ask, there are a lot of people here, a lot of comments, I'm sure, and questions, that you keep those comments and questions to as close to 30 seconds as possible so we can get to as many people as possible. If there is time, we will try to circle back, but everybody will have the, we're going to get through as many people to have the opportunity to speak as possible. So let's go ahead, Marshai, and please raise your hand, and she's going to do her best to find you.
Hi, I'm Monica Goldberg. I live in Bethesda, 20816, and I've lived there since about 2007. Currently was able to purchase a house that I was renting when my landlord wanted to sell it, just barely. My kids were attending MCPS, and I was receiving substantial child support, so I could afford to live there. Now that they've graduated, I'm barely hanging on to that house. And when I was thinking about how to handle this transition, I looked at the zoning regulations and what my options might be, because it's a good-sized lot. And I discovered that what I was able to do, there would not pay for itself. There was not going to be any additional income. It was really not going to help me. So I'm hanging on for now, but I've definitely seen my neighborhood in the space of those years. All those, what you showed about the size is getting huger, and these buildings that could clearly hold 2, 3, 4 housing units just for one family. So it would be helpful to me. It would helpful to be able to diversify the neighborhood and keep people where they live now, just to even keep it the way it is, to have more ability to have density. So I don't really have a question, but except that, I mean, you answered a lot of the questions, and anything more about how we anticipate this would help hold on to people and the affordability would be great, but I know predicting is hard at this point. So just wanted to make that observation that it's a real problem, and it would be really helpful to have some more options.
Appreciate you sharing your personal story.
Hi. Thank you to the council and the planning board for having this session. My name is Michael Gerwitz. I've lived in the Seven Oaks Evanswood neighborhood for about 25 years. I'm head of the Seven Oaks Evanswood Citizens Association Tree Savers Committee. What we do is we volunteer, we go around the neighborhood if people have trees being overwhelmed by invasive vines, which is a massive problem throughout the county. We remove those vines. So I've had a chance to see the state of the trees, especially mature trees, and the canopies that they provide in at least my neighborhood. I'm sure that you're all aware of how important trees are for our environment. Everything from global warming to wildlife habitat, especially for songbirds whose populations are disappearing, and for mental health for people. During COVID, during the lockdown, a lot of people were walking in our streets to take advantage of all the trees. In my work with the Tree Savers Committee, one thing I can tell you is that the backyards and front yards of these neighborhoods, my neighborhood, is where you will find these large mature trees. And so I urge the planning board and the county council, as you move forward, to please do what you can to protect and preserve the large trees in our neighborhoods. I've seen pattern books from several years ago, and a lot of the space that is currently backyards or front yards where you will find these large trees, and the trees are there because of these yards, might be taken up by parking spaces, or some of the building. So as you move forward, please do what you can. It's very important to protect and preserve the large trees we have. Thank you.
Appreciate the comments. If everybody could please try to keep your comments as short as possible so as many people can speak, we would appreciate it.
My dad grew up in Tacoma Park, and I've lived in Silver Spring for about 40 years. I have kind of a technical question, which is, as you expand the density of housing, how does that crosswalk against accessory dwelling units? Would a quadplex be able to have potentially 4 accessory dwelling units?
The current ADU law, and I'm going to look to Lisa to make sure I say this correctly, only allows them on with single-family detached. So it doesn't allow, you can't have an ADU with a duplex or with a triplex or a quadplex. So only with a single-family detached home.
Hi, I currently live in Silver Spring. I was born and raised here and moved away, and I've just moved back about 3 years ago. I wanted to know if there is a maximum of how many of these houses you can put in a neighborhood. We have a neighborhood, a fairly small neighborhood. It only has one exit. It's lovely. I can put my arm out 6 feet. My neighbor can put his arm out 6 feet, and we can touch hands. It's pretty close, but it is single family. And how many of these homes, like say, I'm in the zone, it looks like, for quadruplex, trisec, whatever it is you've got going. How many of these homes can you put in a neighborhood like that? Of maybe, I don't know, how many homes do we have? About 100 homes in my little circle.
Thank you, and we're glad you're back here in Montgomery County. Jim, yep. Well, in our recommendations, there is no limit recommended in terms of particular neighborhoods. I will point out that a few years ago, the County Council updated our ADU law, which previously had some restrictions in there saying you couldn't have any ADU within a certain distance of another ADU. What we found was as they removed that restriction, we've seen ADUs probably about double the number of licensed ADUs that we have in the county since that change went into place. So the expectation with this is not that neighborhoods are going to be overrun with a whole bunch of quadplexes. It's just not going to be suitable for a lot of properties, and a lot of them aren't even ripe for redevelopment. So you'll see changes occur slowly with this, just like we have with ADUs.
Hi, Danielle Brabazon, Woodmore here in Silver Spring. I have no problem with, the need for affordable housing, but have we thought about the stress on our current resources? Like I'm under knowledge that our water is like running out, right? 30% decrease every year. So how is that going to be addressed in this context? Because that's kind of a big problem.
If you want to briefly respond, I will.
Sure.
Some of these are big questions, which part of the point here is for us to understand what the questions and concerns are and have an opportunity to be able to respond. So we don't want to take too much time going into too much detail. Director Sartori?
Yeah, I would just say I think that's a good topic for discussion. Certainly, it's a broader topic than just what we've presented here, which are zoning modifications. Those are problems and things that we need to be thinking about as a county broadly anyway.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, we have staff here. We're recording all of the questions that have come up. The goal here is to provide an opportunity for us to dig deeper into some of the questions that are raised, and so that will be an example of one that we will ask staff to dig deeper into.
Good evening. My name is David Schneider. I live here in Silver Spring. I've lived here since 2003 when my wife and I bought a house that two of us, making a combined of $85,000, could afford. As you mentioned earlier, we couldn't afford that now. We've had a great experience here, and I want to have that experience open to other people. I have no interest in rolling the drawbridge up behind me, and I want to commend the Planning Board for your efforts to promote more inclusive housing. I have a visual aid here, which I'll spend just a minute talking about. I want to draw the Planning
If you
Board's
could do
attention.
30 seconds to talk
Yes.
about it, that would be better.
I can speak very fast. I want to call the Planning Board's attention to parking around metro stations. There's a lot of parking around our metro stations. There's even 17 football fields in Bethesda, et cetera, et cetera. Please encourage and support parking development that takes away the parking around metro stations and replaces them with housing so more people can live here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's, I guess I'll stand up. My name's Jordan Day, born and raised Montgomery County. I have a fairly well-paying white-collar job, and I am rent-burdened and basically don't have a snowball's chance in hell of inheriting or of being able to buy the house I grew up in. I was wondering if the county council or the planning board had any sort of comparison in terms of either traffic or greenhouse gas emissions between, say, the status quo, where that encourages sprawl, encourages spread out development, and this proposal, which would theoretically mildly increase traffic, knock down some trees, but would have denser development.
Is that analysis that's already been done?
Yeah, and I don't have any numbers or anything. I could just tell you that, it's common knowledge in the field that, compact development is one of the biggest things that we can do in terms of being able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and emissions from vehicles. And so this is really in line with that's sustainable and smart growth patterns.
Hi, my name is Mike Lark, and I live in Silver Spring. I also spent a lot of time in Bethesda. Also a member of Montgomery for All. And my question is about the optional method for housing. So you called it a public good if we build smaller. So I was wondering if you could talk about the implementation about this density bonus to make sure that we're going to build these multiplexes that the plan talks about. And I hope it would be a high priority because I think we're all aware of the research about mixed income neighborhoods, how important they are for social mobility, that really drive social and economic inclusion. It's important to me because I happen to be the product of a mixed income neighborhood, apartments and single family houses near each other, including public housing where my grandparents lived. So I was hoping if you could talk more about the implementation of this density bonus. Thank you.
So just real quickly, the way it would work is the smaller the average unit size in the project, then the higher the density you would be allowed. So that's where and it means because it's average, you could have, we're starting at 1,500 square feet, you can have a 1,200 square foot unit and you can have an 1,800 square foot unit. So it's how you can get in a mix of different sizes and price points.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. My name is Jane, and I'm a renter in downtown Silver Spring. I support attainable housing, and I want to make sure that it actually happens. I know from previous planning department analyses, it can be pretty difficult to pencil out, especially the small-scale attainable housing. And I know from watching other jurisdictions that have legalized these types of things that sometimes because they don't allow slightly more flexibility than a single-family house, nothing really happens. So how does what the planning board is recommending here take that into consideration?
Well, I will say that one of the things we've recommended is that we monitor this and come back and see if changes are made to our zoning code to allow this type of housing, how much of it is actually being produced so that we can then determine if there are other interventions or things that need to be done to make it more possible. But I'll tell you right now, you can't do it because our zoning doesn't allow it. So this is the first step in trying to do that.
Hello, my name is Allison Gillespie. I live in the Forest Glen neighborhood, which sits just between Silver Spring and Wheaton. And I've lived there about 25 years. My kids have grown up in that house and are now young adults. And I support attainable housing in part because I realize that they love it here and they would love to live here. And both of them are heartbroken to contemplate the fact that they probably will not be able to find a place to live that they can afford, even though they both seem to be doing a pretty good job finding jobs for themselves, and that's a huge concern for us. I wanted to ask if you could clarify the parking restrictions. In the beginning of this, I was a little disappointed to see restrictions put on parking, and then the chart you showed tonight, Jason, was actually kind of refreshing to me, but I'm not sure I've entirely understood it. And I would couch this by saying that 25 years ago when we moved into our neighborhood, our house was built in 1947, and almost no one on our street has a driveway, much less a garage, and yet houses sell within hours in my neighborhood and continue to do so, and people are fine with it. Many of my neighbors aspire to be one-car families. We are close to metro and buses. And people will always say, well, that's an issue, but it really has not been an issue largely for my neighbors. People move in knowing they're not gonna have parking, and that they factor that into their decision to live there. They know they're gonna have to park on the street. So can you unpack this a little bit for me? Because I would like to see it be not so restrictive that we end up with no housing due to parking.
So I'm not so sure how much more to go into detail on this. I would almost say if you want, Allison, we can talk a little bit afterwards to explain it a little bit more, but basically, again, this is parking minimums exist today, except for within half mile of Metro, as the council recently adopted a zoning text amendment that changed that. And so this is, where you have a two spaces per unit requirement. Again, that's the minimum. You could build more, probably wouldn't, but these are the reductions that the planning board is recommending in certain areas, whether you're inside or outside the priority housing district and whether street parking exists.
And just to be clear, it's a reduction in the minimum requirement, not necessarily in the amount of parking that's produced.
Hi, my name's Robert Ferris. I also live in Forest Glen between Wheaton and Silver Spring. Allison's my neighbor, and I'm a homeowner there. I want to say thank you to the County Council and the Planning Board for taking on this effort. I think attainable housing reform is extremely important. It's one of the things I care most about policy-wise. And I think the presentation made clear how urgent this problem is, but I also, my question is, you noted that the plan was to deliver this plan to the County Council in 2 months, and instead it's taken 2 years, and I'm like, oh my God, if we sit on our hands for another 3 years, we're screwed, right? So the question is, why did it take so long, and how can we make the process move faster?
I'll answer the timing. I won't go into the timing of how we got here. I can just explain, where we're headed. We have, you saw, a series of listening sessions. The purpose is here from the community to have a lot of public engagement, which we are undertaking and doing now. At that point, we will see whether or not there is a proposal to move forward with the council, and then there is a legislative process that has to take place. So I appreciate the urgency and the interest. We're going to move no faster than would be required to be thoughtful and methodical, and no slower to obstruct in a way that is unnecessary. We're going to take the time that is needed to get to a good outcome and make sure that we're hearing from as many voices as possible.
I'm Richard Pavlin. I'm a member of the congregation that's an AIM Action congregation. I've lived in the county for over 50 years, had a condo in Silver Spring, a townhouse in Gaithersburg, and I now live in Potomac, where where the prices of housing are. So I've experienced what it's like to be a renter as well as a homeowner. We're for affordable housing and attainable housing, but we have a few questions. Why can't we put these attainable duplexes in more than 4 of the detached residential zones? That's question one. Secondly, if we're going to have the pattern book and the development standards being given to the council to approve, can we be sure that homeowners and stakeholders have a stake and a hearing as an integral process in setting that pattern book and those development standards? And then finally, in the medium scale housing, can we see if there's more zones that we can put medium scale housing? Because right now it's only 2 zones. It's, I think it's R60 and R90. Why can't we do a little bit more in terms of medium scale? And finally, could we increase that 500 feet that is pretty restrictive for being close to a corridor? Could that be expanded to a little bit more? I really think the county and the planning board are doing the right thing.
Thank you for that. Do you want to quickly go through those 4 items and explain the recommendation?
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, with regard to the last one, that's certainly something that will be a consideration and part of the conversation as we go forward in terms of the specifics, whether it's 500, something less, something more. All of that is obviously open for discussion. The other thing about the zones, we have a number of other zones in the county that already allow some of this type of or more dense development. Our commercial residential zone, or C/R zone, where you can get commercial, you could also get residential. That's where we get a lot of our high-rise and mid-rise apartment buildings. These four are our primary single-family zones. We have a few others that aren't in very many areas of the county, and then the largest one that we have is our agricultural reserve, which is a whole different conversation. Yeah, right, okay.
Hello, my name's Michelle Armstead, and I live in East County and Councilmember Mink's district, and I live back in the day where they used to call it Killer Boulevard, but it's Castle Boulevard. So I've lived there for 30 years, and I've always said that I'm never going to move off of Castle or out of Silver Spring until I buy a home. 30 years later, I'm still here, and I'm concerned about when I age into place. I want to have a home where I don't have to walk up 4 flights of stairs to take my groceries and everything. So my question is, what do you know about Viva White Oak? Because that's where I want to be, and that's where I want to get my name on the list for Viva White Oak.
I didn't know it was going there.
I'll just, obviously not a direct topic related to this with Viva White Oak necessarily, but there are a number of conversations that are happening with potential progress at Viva White Oak that many of us are excited about, potential public-private partnership and finally seeing that move forward. And I think many of us share your interest in that, if not your direct potential benefit from it. So we're working on it. And the county executive and the council are very much moving towards doing whatever we can to make sure that Viva White Oak comes to fruition.
I'll just add, I just heard that an application has been submitted, so it's in the queue now for review.
Meaning an application to the planning board,
right.
Just so
Yes.
everybody understands what that means.
Son? Okay. My name is Christine Lurie, and I've lived in my 1,100 square foot house in Silver Spring since 1980. I have a number of points, so I will try to be very efficient. First of all, we know that part of what's driving up housing prices across the country is the fact that investors are coming in with all cash offers and bidding over like normal people who want to buy a home. If you read the report that they posted online, it's very clear that this attainable housing is something that only an investor could afford to construct. As they come in, they will drive up housing prices for the rest of us and in a way artificially inflate and worsen the problem that they are attempting to correct. Secondly, I live in the purple line, oh my God, this is happening moment. And our streets are very narrow. And they are all parked up. And the idea that we're going to have quads, and it's lovely to think that everyone will always take public transportation and everyone will only have one car. We have a one-car family now. We used to have 4 cars. Our boys lived at home, and they went to the University of Maryland, and then they worked. The other thing I'd like to mention is the gentleman who had lived in Somerville. My son lives in Somerville. He can't afford to live there either. But when we talk about attainable housing, think about these houses, these lots being artificially inflated prices because of investors. A quad in Somerville, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath quad in Somerville is $1.5 million, which is way more than my 1,100 square foot house is worth. So when we talk about attainable, be aware of the fact that every lot, every one of these houses sits on is worth $1 bazillion, and the only way a developer makes money is to make those houses, those attainable units, cost $1 bazillion plus.
Hello, my name is Ben Hollander. I grew up in Montgomery County, first in a townhouse in Burtonville and then a detached single-family home in Silver Spring. I currently live in an apartment in Silver Spring, which I rent and hope to one day be a homeowner in the county. I support these efforts to allow more types of housing construction. As others have noted, the rising prices have made it difficult for many in my generation to stay in the area, particularly for neighborhoods close to metro stations. I think it's foolish to artificially limit how many people can live there. There is not going to be one solution that deals with these high housing prices, but this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Just real quickly, there was a request to respond to the last, and we'll try to keep this short because we do want to hear comments like that so that they can be part of our conversation going forward. I do want to highlight that one of the issues that we're experiencing, again, where every single zip code in the county is affordable to fewer and fewer households than they were 20 plus years ago, is more situations like you described where people are coming to the table with cash, but it's not just investors, it's actual people who can afford to bring cash to a closing. And it means that's part of the exclusivity that's happening with us doing nothing right now, because the only option you have if an 1,100 square foot home is torn down, it's going to be replaced with a much larger home that's going to sell for several $1 million. And so this is trying to reverse that trend in some ways.
Hi, my name is Whitney Warren. I live in Forest Glen, Silver Spring, and I've also lived in high-rise New York apartments. My concern is also about some of the zoning and the traffic that's not considered at all. So I wanted to just say what I have found on our proposed apartment that's going to supposedly be put up on the court at the metro stop near us. Traffic wasn't considered at all by anyone in this plan, and I find that the traffic on Georgia Avenue, Forest Glen, is already terrible. So I have great concerns about the fact that in those zones where this growth is happening, traffic and the people who live there aren't considered because we're just sort of, disposable because we're already in those growth zones, even though we've been there for 25 years and didn't know about the plan. I also wonder how you will enforce not having people just buy these up and then, things be expensive. I also wonder how you will keep or enforce making the designs conform to the neighborhood and how much you will listen to the neighbors. I have not found that that's been my experience with the development, even though I'm for this movement. I've not found that my neighbors feel like they've been listened to. So that's a big concern for me going forward with this plan.
So one thing I do want to clarify, with regard to the pattern book, it's not going to be an architectural design pattern book to ensure that the architectural design of every home that's built matches every other home that's in a neighborhood, right? It's really to ensure that we're getting it's like I said, a visual representation of the zoning code requirements. There was something else.
Could you just explain what that means? 'Cause I think I saw a lot of confusion.
Sure. So again, it's kind of, if you can bring that up, it's how you can lay out a duplex like this, or that's a triplex, right? And meet the setback requirements on the sides, on the front, how you can accommodate parking. It's not really getting into the architectural design of, certain features of the house to ensure that it's consistent with the neighbors.
The idea is that, as you're recommending, that the pattern would look like an existing single-family home, but wouldn't be a single-family home.
That's right. How to make it look like that.
But not all single-family homes look the same, and as you look at tear-downs, they look quite different than the houses likely that they're replacing. So I just want to make sure it's understood what that actually meant. It's not to say the type of shingles or the type, arts and crafts versus some other, colonial or whatever the case may be.
Thanks. My name is Chad Rector. My wife and I live in a home near downtown Silver Spring, a single-family detached home that we bought 16 years ago that we would never be able to afford today. I strongly support the recommendations of the committee, and I'm really excited to see this go forward. When Arlington, Virginia instituted the missing middle policy a couple years ago, which it seems like this is very similar to, people expected it to have, a radically transformative effect on, well, I don't know, but people thought it would have a bigger impact on the housing market there than it really did. In the past 2 years, I'm sure you know the numbers, but it's something like only 40 or 50 permits have been issued for new missing middle homes countywide. Do you have a theory as to why the development of missing middle in Arlington after the zoning reforms there have been such a trickle, and how we might be able to avoid that here? Thank you.
So one, I will just remind people again that our speaker series next week, next Thursday, we'll have someone from Arlington County there. So questions like this would be a good question for them to be able to answer. I don't know personally exactly why, what's going on there. I would just point out that, they're very similar to us in that there's nothing in these recommendations that requires anyone to change their single-family home into a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex. And a lot of us are very comfortable and happy with the house that we have and won't want to make any changes. And I think that's, this doesn't just happen wholesale, neighborhoods change. It's a slow thing that takes time.
Could you earlier you mentioned the ADUs and that they doubled. You didn't give the context of what doubling means. Do you have those numbers? And then what we're really talking about here, the proposal is really about tear downs, when they happen and what you can replace a tear down with. Could you share, if you have handy, the number of, I think I know the number, but I'm not going to share it here since you have an expert who can share it, the number of tear downs currently in the county, just to give a sense of scope of what we're talking about. I think it's important for context.
Sure. The number of tear downs currently we see in the county is about 200 per year. Right now, those are 200 single-family homes that are being replaced with larger single-family homes. In terms of ADUs, it had been about 30 per year that we were seeing being licensed. It's now about 60.
Yeah, there were about 750 total ADUs that were licensed as we were taking that up.
Right. And ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Sure.
We kind of know that too. You want to share that?
So I was just going to say, so the question was, do we know the location of those tear downs? We do. You want to? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
So the teardowns predominantly occur in the western part of the county, but in recent years we have been seeing them trickle over to East County, especially in the areas surrounding downtown Silver Spring, for example. Jason presented that information about the typical home. That's partly because we're seeing the increasing number of teardowns. We get this information from the Department of Permitting Services demolition permits.
It's Lisa Gavoni is our primary housing planner at the Planning Department.
The only person who's individually gotten an applause here, by the way, which well-deserved that staff get the applause.
Hi, my name is Danny Rose, and I live in Chevy Chase, parallel to Beach Drive, a couple houses from the corner where the French school has just left. My neighbors and I are very concerned that the school is going to turn into a huge multiplex. Not only am I concerned about my neighbors who are looking to sell their house on corner lots in the near future, mostly because of the crime. My car insurance has doubled, not because I have a 17-year-old driver, but because there's been so much car vandalism on my street. I'm also concerned that I have had problems getting off my street to turn, like I said, I'm 3 houses from the corner because of flooding of Rock Creek. So I'm very concerned about the environmental impact of what this could happen in my neighborhood, and also the transportation, because despite the school leaving, transportation is a cut through off of East-West Highway, Connecticut Avenue. I had to take 15 minutes to just get across Beach Drive to get out of my neighborhood. And so I'm very concerned about what, although I support it because I came to my neighborhood when my daughter was 3 weeks old and we bought our house for the cost of the land. We were very fortunate. I couldn't afford my house today, so I really empathize. But I also can't afford to move anywhere else. So what do we do about the value? And like what my neighbor had said about the developers coming, buying the land, knocking it down, and then selling quadruplexes for almost the same price as what I'm paying for my single-family home.
So I'll just say, maybe let's talk afterwards too, because that's a situation that's kind of different, because we have very few places like that in down county where potentially a large parcel of land would become available for you. This is a little different. There are things that can happen now with that. Yeah.
The important thing to note here is that dynamic of outside investors exists. And in fact, it's an acute issue now with teardowns and non-teardowns, because single-family homes have increased in value. You see almost no other product that has increased in value the way these have. So those are concerns I think that all of us have. I just want to acknowledge that. There was a state bill to try to restrict who could buy homes and whether or not you could be an LLC. It's complicated, and whether or not the state even has the authority to do that is an open question of restricting who buys and how they buy any product, much less housing. But that is certainly something that is an existing challenge, and would also be a challenge that would continue under this proposal. This proposal that wouldn't create that issue, but I understand the concern. I just wanted to make sure that I noted that these are ongoing issues with the purchasing of single-family homes. There are questions of how frequent that is in Montgomery County and in Maryland, and we're seeking information. I'm looking to get information on that, because whether or not that's as big of an issue here as it is in other places is an open question. We do have a lot of cash offers of single-family homes currently, and those cash offers are not necessarily from developers and BlackRock and other huge corporations that we've heard from. They're from wealthy people who can afford very expensive homes, and that has real consequences for middle-class families, young couples, people who otherwise don't have access.
Hi there, my name's Leanne Tobias, and I live in Bethesda. And I think that the idea of attainable housing is an excellent one. I think all of the needs that you have cited are real. However, I think that the program you've come up with is not going to produce the results that you hope it will, and that a lot of the impact is going to be counterproductive. But don't take it from me. On July 18th, the Planning Board had a really great, interesting session that included a presentation by an economist from the Urban Institute named Yona Freemark, who is arguably the person who in this country knows most about upzoning and missing middle housing programs. And what he said was, for example, what his concern was that in many desirable locations, like Montgomery County, what typically has happened is that upzoning programs increase the price of land so that the housing product that is delivered, even if it's smaller, this includes apartment buildings, results in more expensive housing than the housing it replaced. So my concern is that while the objectives of the county are really laudable, the program being advocated is really not going to produce the benefits that you hope. I noticed that a little earlier you were saying there'd be great and careful monitoring to see that whether the construction that you hoped would take place would occur. My question is, why upzone 82% of the county's single-family housing for a strategy that you're not sure is going to work? Why not try a pilot program first?
Thank you, Leanne. So I would just say one thing we do know is that we've done nothing on this in terms of allowing diverse types of housing in our neighborhoods, and we've seen the impact that that's had. And so this is, while we may not see a ton of duplexes and triplexes come about as a result of this, we won't get any if we don't make these changes. And we have a diverse housing need. There are people who are looking for housing, first-time home buyers. My daughters would love to continue to live in Montgomery County, and there just aren't opportunities to do that, to potentially become a first-time home buyer and to gain that equity. And so we're trying to create more opportunities for that.
It's not a debate. Sorry, Leanne. Appreciate the comments.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Maria Schmidt, and I live in the in Evanswood neighborhood in Silver Spring. Now, you had mentioned, and I'm going to back something that's been raised a few times today, but how will the county prevent hedge funds and other wealthy investors from buying up homes and outbidding individuals, people who want to buy these homes? Now, you mentioned, and you can please clarify if I don't have this correct, that you don't know if there's any way to do so. And if that's the case, there are protections that could be taken, like not allowing all this upzoning. Because if you have a small home, like in my neighborhood, we have many small homes, I have not seen any tear downs. I have seen many elderly people passing, and people are very grateful to get a home that maybe doesn't have central air, that has a 40-year-old kitchen, and they can get it at a reasonable, yes, it's still expensive, but it's going to be a reasonable price. And if we start allowing quadplexes, some wealthy investor, some hedge fund is going to come in, tear it down. Who's able to do that? Spend a year tearing it down and building 4 $1.5 million units, and then it's going to prevent some resident of the county who maybe is lower income or middle income from buying that home. I mean, you talk about equity, and you talk about equity being a goal. Now, equity, attainable housing does not necessarily address equity, and you know it doesn't address affordability. So I think you really need to work out that equation and understand how you will enforce equity. and give opportunities to lower-income people. Maybe programs for first-time home buyers. That might help individuals.
We have a program for first-time home buyers. Proud to add funding to that, work with colleagues to add funding to that. I appreciate the comments. I will note my understanding of the dynamics in the investments in single-family homes is that those investments are not necessarily exclusively, and in fact, not predominantly in teardowns. The investments of the hedge funds and BlackRocks are in existing single-family homes that are then flipped or are rented. And some of the single-family homes as owner-occupied, switching to rental is actually one of the fastest growing areas that we see in rental housing is in single-family homes. That's not necessarily because it's hedge funds. It's just that's a dynamic. People see an asset that is doubling in value. They don't want to give it up. So if they need to move, they keep it because it's a great income stream, but it doesn't allow for a home ownership opportunity. But again, that issue that you raise, a very legitimate issue, but it's not unique and it's not created by this series of proposals necessarily. It is a dynamic in a housing environment where the cost of housing has astronomically increased based on inflation. You could not find a better investment in many places, in many cases, than in housing, and some of that is related to the scarcity of housing. There's more people who want housing in desirable areas like Montgomery County than there are units. There are questions of how to address that and what to do, but I just want to clarify, because you asked me to clarify the point that I was making earlier. That is a challenge that exists because of the nature of the housing challenges that we face, which would be true if we do nothing, and it would be true if we do something, and it would be true on the wide range of things in between.
Okay, just a quick reminder to keep your questions or comments 30 seconds.
And real quickly, one thing I will just add with regard to the replacement home, the tear-down rebuilds, when our analysis showed that builders target homes that sell between the 30th and 70th percentile of the local housing average median price, right, or median price of housing in the neighborhood. So that's why we don't see wholesale neighborhoods all being torn down and rebuilt. They have to be in the right price point for it to make sense for that to even happen.
Hi, my name is Richard Ingebretson, and I want to commend the Planning Committee for putting forward this proposal, and I urge the Council to move forward quickly in enacting it. I'm a direct beneficiary of this type of housing. My wife and I were able to move to Silver Spring into a townhouse community in Sligo Creek because it existed. We were outpriced of all of the single-family homes in the surrounding area. Moreover, this area is a perfect microcosm of how this can work. Within 50 feet of my house, there are multi-million-dollar single-family homes. My townhouse community, small 1,000 square feet homes, and a high-rise condo tower. All of it coexists together in Sligo Creek with access to transportation and greenery and environment in the environment. We should be able to encourage this and allow this everywhere else. There were 2 empty lots just south of me, 10 feet from our house. They were built now with 5,000 square feet, $1 million homes. If we had this plan, they could have had 4 units instead of 1. Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, thank you. I'm Wendy. I live in Silver Spring, about a mile from here, and I walked, which was nice. I had a question relative to this gentleman who was talking about trees and maintaining green space. You talked about the pattern book, and I wasn't clear on whether the new models in the pattern books would in fact take away green space, or it would be neutral on it. That's my question. Thank you.
Sure. It should be neutral on that. It's not, we weren't addressing, or we weren't planning to address as we do that exactly where trees, because we don't know on each parcel where trees would be. But it's certainly something that we need to continue to have as part of the conversation. Forest conservation laws and even stormwater mitigation and other things that we oftentimes hear about are all still apply with this type of development.
Yeah, the lot coverage, height, setback, et cetera, things that would have an impact on trees, whether it's a tear down or another type of unit, like a duplex, should be neutral if you keep the setbacks and the lot coverage the same. parking would be a question, but parking would be a question whether or not you had to tear down as well. I did want to note that we did increase the fee. I worked with Evan Glass, who is here and chair of the Environment Transportation Committee, to significantly increase the fee if and when somebody does remove a tree, to make sure that it actually pays for the cost to replace that tree. We also updated our forest conservation law. Obviously, there's more that all of us would like to do in these areas, but we have been looking at those issues and addressing them as best as we can.
My name is Erin Fulham. I have lived in the county for almost 40 years now. And everybody else who has lived here 40 years, my house was much cheaper. I am also very concerned about these issues. I'm a little worried that we're talking more about attainable housing than we are about affordable housing, because where I live, you build, new townhouses are being built that are $1 million. So that doesn't seem to be the missing middle to me. That seems like the missing up. I've been working on this issue for a while. I've been hosting refugees in my own home for over 10 years now. I have been talking to an architect about adding an ADU to our property. And I really am a little concerned about, because I know that at the same time the county is considering reducing the fees that developers are paying and not making them think about infrastructure. I walk down my old street all the time and I smell gas. And if you call the gas company, they say, well, there's less than 10% leakage, so we're not going to worry about fixing that right now. So there's a lot of infrastructure in these older neighborhoods that needs to be addressed. And I think that if developers are going to be building quadruplexes, then developers need to be putting something into the county as well as just taking out of the county. So I applaud the council for trying to address this issue. I really want you to think about not only doing attainable, but also affordable. And I like also the idea of it not being 82% of the county to practice on. So I'll write the rest of my comments.
I did want to say, I didn't talk about all of the issues. I'll let you perform. We have been doing a tremendous amount on affordable housing. In fact, record investments, new approaches, things that the county hasn't been doing for many years. In fact, probably a couple decades we have been doing. Very proud of that work. I'm not going to go into all the details of the hundreds of millions of dollars in the last few years that we've invested in affordable housing. The reality is, unless we were putting billions and billions of dollars into affordable housing, we couldn't come close to the need. And so it's an and, not an or question, has been the approach that the council has been taking in recent years. And I did just want to note, I appreciate the comments. The growth in infrastructure policy was referenced, just so those understand. And the council has not taken any action on that. The planning board has made recommendations to us, which relate to impact taxes and infrastructure, and the way in which we build is something that we take up every 4 years, and that it just came over to the council, and we're just beginning our process to look into it, and we appreciate your comments on that as well.
Hi, I live in Seven Oaks in Silver Spring. I've been there about 20 years. Small home, built in 1938. On the edge of our neighborhood, 5 years ago, I don't know, maybe it's 10 years ago now, townhouses were built. The homes of my style maybe sell for $900,000. The townhouses sold in the past year for $900,000 to over $1 million. Are there market forces now that will bring about a different result than that? Because if there aren't, I don't see where this is attainable housing.
So, with regard to the townhouses, that would be achieved through in our recommendations through the attainable housing optional method, which again, there we're talking about a average unit size of 1,500 square feet. And so it's tough. I think most townhouses that are being built today, and even ones that were built a couple decades ago, are much larger than that. And so we're talking about much smaller units so that the pricing will be more affordable.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Dan. I grew up in Montgomery County. I live in East Silver Spring now in a townhome. I wanted to share not my own housing story, but my family's housing story because, a lot of folks have talked about fourplexes this evening, and it seems a little abstract to folks. So my grandparents emigrated here from Guyana, my whole family, in the 1970s. My mother is the youngest of 13, and my grandfather, when coming here, was trying to figure out how he could house all of his adult children in one building. He thought maybe one big house. No, he found a fourplex in Petworth in DC, 4 units where, as his children grew into adulthood and started families of their own, they could have their own homes within that building with kitchens and so forth, and still be connected to each other. Caribbean parents like to keep their kids close, right? And that building is my family home, right? I didn't grow up there. My mom, we moved to Silver Spring in '91 because it was close to them, right? And that was normal for me growing up, right? That building, 4 units, is probably 4,000 square feet. It's on probably a 5,000-foot lot on a street full of fourplexes, God forbid. And it's fine, right? This is how my family could make roots in this country, and it is how my aunts and uncles and my mother could build roots in this country and start their own families, right? And so when I went to look for my own home, I spent 2 years looking for the townhouse I live in now in East Silver Spring, and it is literally the most affordable home that sold in 20910 in 2019. I'm proud of that. But, like I said, Caribbean parents want to keep their parents close. I am 15 minutes from my mom in White Oak. That's great. My little brother, he just got a full-time job. He's looking for his first home. He moved to Howard County, right? And my mother, bereft, right? There's a whole river in between them. And I understand there are a lot of really valid concerns this evening. We've had these conversations in East Silver Spring for years, and I hear them, right? I really want to encourage folks to be open-minded about this because, as has been explained here, there are really significant problems facing the county right now. There are issues with investors right now. There are issues with affordability right now. And they're not going to get better unless we do something about it. And so you have a thing in front of you that could possibly help.
Hi, my name is Shakuntala Makijani. I'm a resident of 20910 near downtown Silver Spring. My husband and I own a condo there, and I'm a nearly lifelong resident of Montgomery County, born into an apartment that my parents rented. When I was a baby, they moved to 20901 Forest Glen, lived there till I was 12, then moved up a bit to Bethesda 20817, where they still live in the home that I continue to grow up in. So I'm pretty acquainted with all the housing changes that have happened in the county. So basically, I'm just wanting to make a comment to voice my support along similar lines for this type of program, to put that voice out there too. I think I've seen from living here and watching my parents live here, the nature of neighborhoods changes no matter what we do. They live in a neighborhood where there is a ton of these tear downs. It's a forested neighborhood. They have neighbors that cut down all of their trees to build backyard pools, and there's nothing stopping that. So I just think the nature of these neighborhoods is going to change, and I think it's good to think about how we want it to change, and I think this is really thoughtful, and I appreciate it. And oh yeah, I just want to say too, to echo the point made about just greenhouse gases and climate change and environmental planning, that I really like that a lot of it is focused along these public transit corridors and building more density there. That was a big reason we wanted to move where we did and find a condo where we did, which, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mike English, live in downtown Silver Spring. Want to second everything a lot of people said, but the previous 2 speakers as well. And there's a lot to unpack. I want to talk about 2 main things. I think that the concerns a lot of people said about, it's attainable, not affordable, et cetera. I think Director Sartori and everyone has done a good job of explaining why these help, even if they're not the most affordable thing. They're part of the solution. The building we're in now is a Housing Opportunities Commission building that has mixed income, some of it very affordable senior housing. We need things like that. We need more affordable housing. We need the rent stabilization law that I, played a part in advocating for. We need a lot of things. Cure-alls cure nothing. Cure-alls are not panaceas, they are snake oil, okay? If somebody tells you one thing's gonna fix it, that's an excuse. So don't look for one thing to fix everything. Speaking broadly, I just wanna say one other thing, that we pride ourselves in being a progressive county. I say that to say one thing, that I believe people are mostly good. I believe that most people that disagree with me are mostly good and want what's best and are welcoming in their hearts. But I think that that cannot be a passive wish. That needs to be an active value that we do. And if we are only willing to welcome the idea of someone, but aren't allowing our neighbors to change to achieve it, we're not really doing anything. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Harkins from Kensington. My question is, would the conformance with the pattern book be waivable or subject to a zoning variance? As things stand now, you can always apply to get the permit approved and have something that's into the setback area or otherwise would violate the zoning law. Thanks.
I just real quickly, I mean, obviously we don't have anything actually before the council right now, but the recommendation would be that it wouldn't be something that's waivable. I'm sorry? It's the expectations that it wouldn't be waivable, but again, we haven't gone through the process of
Would not, I think it was hard to hear you. Would not be waivable?
Would not be waivable, yes.
Okay, but again, we don't have a legislative proposal before us. That is an important and good question that we can address as we think about these issues.
Hello, George Bailey, living right near here. Quickly, I'd like to certainly emphasize that better green planning, environmental planning in this area hasn't been discussed very much. That's very important. As for example, net zero energy building techniques, very important. That should be emphasized also. Also, the needs of and growing needs of our senior community here is very important. That needs to be directly addressed. How to meet the needs presently and the future needs so that seniors that are presently living in housing don't be taken advantage in various ways. Also that seniors who need housing have opportunities appropriate for them and for future generations. So green planning with new and appropriate technologies, as for example, the solar decathlon houses that are planned and built by University of Maryland and many universities around the country. Small floor plans, about 1,000 square feet. Net zero housing, but very efficient and very nice housing for a family of 4. How can those be integrated into these kind of plans? And also, even though they're kind of in a way similar to the accessory unit or what actually used to be called grandmother flats or granddad flats. 100 years ago, that's what they were called. Backyard, nice places for grandmother to live at while her family would have a large house right next to them. So these ideas have been around. How can we improve upon them so that we have 21st century design kinds of housing that are appropriate for our needs in the 21st century?
Good things for us to be thinking about and considering. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Kathleen Sammy. Some of you know my face, see me around. I've been around for a long time. I've lived in fourplexes. I've lived in low-income housing or rent-controlled buildings in single-family home neighborhoods. I live in townhouses. My husband was ecstatic that he got to cut the yard. He'd never lived in a house when we bought our house 32 years ago. I'm here because of environmental issues, and I'm trying to make heads and tails of your topologies. One of my big things is minimum and maximums, tree canopy coverage. I championed that for the green coverage of the downtown Silver Spring plan, and Tom Hucker was really helpful, and Evan Glass, to make sure that those percentages got added to the downtown plan, and I applaud them forever for that. And that's where I'm talking about now, is about the impervious surfaces. So on your typologies, I did a bunch of equations. In Seven Oaks, my neighborhood, we have homes from 1,100 square feet to 2,400 square feet on average. I've checked Zillow, I've done all the calculations. The lot coverage is allowed 35%. I saw that on yours, I calculated mine, it's 10% lot coverage, and I looked at your topologies, and it's 20 to 22%. And I'm just curious why we're not thinking about this from a minimum maximum impervious surfaces, how much you can build. I believe in the goals of multiplex housing and what you're talking about and all those issues. I don't dispute any of that. For me, it's about the groundwater, it's about the tree canopy coverage, the urban heat island of downtown Silver Spring, which is so significantly hot, and how my neighborhood has lost 30% tree canopy in the last 20 years, and it's going down and down, and there's no forest conservation law, it doesn't protect the trees. So I would like to request that you look at this through the prism of impervious surfaces, percents, that what you can add to or not. And then I look at Up County, River Road, Potomac. I was in a house the other day that's 6,000 square feet, and there's 2 people living in that house. And I would like to say, what's the inventory of houses over 5,000 square feet in this county? And why couldn't you just make a law change that any house of that size could become a duplex, triplex, quadplex? Because there are a lot of them, and you don't have to change any impervious surface. So I'd just like you to think about those things. Thank you.
A lot for us to consider. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Brizette Chapman, and I live in a beautiful cul-de-sac right off of Dale Drive. It's been interesting recently, and I want to just thank you, Councilman Friedson, for the big work around affordable housing. I'm here to support the attainable housing, and I think what I just want to speak to, because I came from Boston, New York, down through Baltimore, and found this lovely place in 1985 where I've raised 5 children, some of them very successful out of Blair Parent. And I'm looking at neighbors, we're aging, but also young parents are coming in, young folk, and the cost of our housing is off the chain. What I'm more concerned about with the attainable plan is just, are you looking at the implication for, basically it's urbanization. It is intensifying the housing stock. And we need to do what's good for the whole. So I don't have objection to that. But I can't do the little scooters. I need to be able to come out my house and get in my car. And when I called the police officer and said, he's parked that utility truck in front of my house. For weeks they said, well, you don't own the street. So my question is, how do we deal with the intensification of visitors, friends, and folks who are coming? Are we going to have resident permits? I just want to know how we manage the parking off-site in our neighborhoods for people particularly who need to walk out the door into a vehicle, even if it's an Uber. Thank you.
Well, we should definitely talk because it sounds like we have a similar history in terms of New York, Boston, and here. But obviously, these are things for us to think about. You know, there are unique elements to each neighborhood that come into play, too. So.
Hi, I'm Angie McCarthy, and I live about a mile from here, and I'm only able to afford paying my partner part of our condo's mortgage because he's an engineer, and then I'm an environmental lobbyist, so not great on that front. My best quality of life has been when I worked a white-collar job in Buffalo, New York in 2019, and I lived in a triplex, and my rent was $400. Because, I know, because of that rent, I was able to save up money and move to Montgomery County and pursue careers that were closer to my heart, but much less lucrative. I'm pro duplexes and triplexes, even if we all need to take public transit. One suggestion, maybe we need to do an e-bike rebate or encourage people to become one-car families, so that way, if we're all having to swallow the medicine, at least we can do it together. As someone who's going to be looking to start a family in the next 5 years, my partner and I will be making decisions on if we should pay a bunch of money for housing in Montgomery County and have great school systems, or if we should pay a bunch of money in DC and have universal pre-K. So I think there are many ways that we can balance out how housing can impact whether or not young people stay in the county and continue to pay taxes. Regarding resource management, that's come up. I hope I will hear from the Planning Board and County Council in the future on making sure that data centers and other large impervious surfaced buildings are not built into areas where we can have increased housing. Individual condos and duplexes are not the largest consumers of water and energy. It's the Amazons, it's the Googles, it's the Microsofts, not our future neighbors who will make our coffee, teach our kids, fight our fires, and make our lives richer by being our friends and community.
Just housekeeping note, out of respect and because the Recreation Department needs us to be out of this room so they can clean up by 9 o'clock, we have a little less than 10 minutes for us to go. So please be brief in your comments and questions. Thank you.
My name is Chris Vroom. I live in downtown Silver Spring, also about a mile from here. As you can see, I am a nurse. I've worked in pretty much every hospital in this area over the last 10 years. And affordable housing is more than just a moral good. If we do not have housing that a nurse making approximately $80,000 a year can afford in, you're not going to have a healthcare system. If you don't have housing that a teacher making approximately $60,000 to $70,000 can afford, you're not going to have schools for your kids to go to. If you don't have housing that's affordable for somebody making about $15 to $20 to stock shelves at your grocery stores, you're not going to have a grocery store. That's kind of part of this decision is we need affordable housing for all aspects of our society, because I can tell you it's become a running joke that I might actually be the only nurse living in down county, Montgomery County, because I actually literally get job offers when people say, you're the only person that lives within 20 minutes of our office. We need somebody. If you're a hospital and you provide heart attack care, you have a door to balloon time and you need to get to a hospital within 30 minutes, how much housing is affordable to a nurse making $80,000 a year within 30 minutes of a suburban hospital? Not much.
I'm Jenny Sue Dunner, and I live in, thank you, it's so loud. I live in Chevy Chase, and thanks to the Planning Department and to Councilmember Friedson for being here tonight. I really wanted to come because I wanted to hear what other people were saying in other parts of the county. And I have been concerned because I'm not sure that I'm getting a vision of Montgomery County with what we're doing. This is a serious issue and it must be addressed. I think we can all agree on that. But I think the other part of it, of the equation is that how do we do that? What about the economy? For example, businesses and companies send out brochures about beautiful Montgomery County, and they talk about the neighborhoods, they talk about the schools and the many benefits. And I'm not too sure that we are going to be attracting the kind of businesses and corporations who want to come here, because you're basically, in good part, disenfranchising a good portion of Montgomery County, because sometimes people just plain like to live in single-family neighborhoods. Now, that doesn't detract from what you folks are talking about, but I think that there's room for everyone, and I'm not seeing that, and I think it's a very dangerous road that we're going down, and we need to look at these things in a big, big picture. And anyway, thanks for letting me come.
Hi, Gordy Brenny. I live about a mile from here in Woodside Park. I had the privilege of sitting in the growth and infrastructure hearing yesterday, and I listened to a lot of developers talk about how they need more taxpayer subsidies to build attainable housing. That's your money. And a lot of you aren't going to move into these houses because you can't afford it. In fact, the fact is that those that live in unimproved houses traditionally pay property taxes for people who build, tear down, rebuild McMansions, because their reassessments are deferred by at least 3 years before they hit market value. And the way the market's been rising, it could be 5, 10 years before they're paying their fair share of property taxes. I want to talk about equity. Andy, you mentioned that the trend is towards single-family homes that are being rented. And in fact, on the Georgia Avenue corridor, we see a lot of that. And Mr. Sartori, you mentioned that a lot of the tear-down rebuilds, and attainable housing is a misnomer, it should be called the tear-down rebuild program. that the tear-down rebuilds are being targeted by developers in the 30 to 70% range. Who lives in those homes? And I would ask you to give us data or develop data before you do any of this. I'll tell you who lives in those homes. Older people who are trying to retire in place, and renters who are probably immigrants, sometimes multiple families in a single family home. What happens to those people? Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Karen Roper. I live in Silver Spring. And I want to talk about the equity too, because what I'm hearing here is we want to make this missing middle, but I haven't heard any of this going to be priced for this gentleman that only makes $80,000 a year. He isn't going to be able to afford this, not down here. I'm also concerned, I'd like to see you take a better look at this, just like he was talking about. This is going to apply unevenly, depending on where you live. There are homes still in, we're talking downtown Silver Spring, but this applies to Aspen Hill, to White Oak. There are homes there still $300,000 and $400,000. Who do you think's living in them? When you're talking about predatory investment, they're going there. They can pick up half a dozen of them and wipe out whole communities. I know, I just think you need to put more in place, like Kathleen is saying about impervious surfaces, and more in place for these unintended consequences that I don't hear anybody really has an answer to right now. It's sort of, oh yeah, they're going to be expensive. Thank
All right,
you.
we probably only have time for 2 or 3 more.
Hi, my name is Joyce Nalowik. I am a homeowner in downtown Silver Spring. I'm also a business owner for the past 40 years. Thank you, Dan. Okay, and one thing I'm going to ask you about is downtown Silver Spring versus the neighborhoods right next to downtown Silver Spring. In downtown Silver Spring now, we have a glut of office space that is empty. Okay, there is no demand for the office space. There's a huge demand for housing. So is the county spending any time, effort trying to convert any of the office buildings into housing? Number one. Number two.
Yes.
In downtown, okay, good, but it should happen more because I've seen complete floors of high-rise buildings that are completely empty now. The other thing is the county doing anything to preserve missing middle that is currently in downtown Silver Spring, like the Falklands, one of the premier townhouse apartment complexes in the United States. So that's one thing. The second thing is there's a huge demand for single-family houses. That's what everybody's talking about, wanting to own a single-family house. So I'm sort of confused why there's a consideration for rezoning the single-family houses to quads. You're going to wipe out the single-family houses, and where are you going to build single-family houses then? Do we open up the agricultural land up county for people who want them? I mean, it seems like you need to preserve a little bit of everything if we're talking diversity in housing stock for people of diverse incomes. We need to cover it all. We don't need to wipe out the single-family neighborhoods so that there are quadplexes with 4 apartments. And downtown is hurting right now with the glut of office space. So you really do need to re-envision that. Instead of opening up single-family houses, having the developers go in there, make a ton of money, and then the developers say, gee, we need some sort of help to convert these office buildings that are dying. And you can't say no at that point. So anyhow,
Thank
those
you
are the
very much.
two things.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and the very last thing I'm bringing up is my husband and I bought a house in downtown Silver Spring, and we have an office in downtown Silver Spring because we love to walk. And we walk everywhere, except I also have severe asthma and lung problems now. So there's some days that I can't walk to work. I need the car. So once again, you're considering about parking, think about people who have some handicaps that you may not see.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We have time for one more.
Hi. People who I care about can't afford to live here anymore, so for that reason, I strongly support allowing duplexes and quadplexes to be built in areas currently zoned for single-family homes. Furthermore, any problems with predatory investors are made far worse by the fact that areas have restrictive zoning. So just want to get that out of the way.
All right, I think we need to wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I did want to acknowledge Claire Isley is here on behalf of the county executive. Thank you for joining us as well. I want to give a shout out and acknowledge the people who made this possible, the council PIO team, the planning PIO team, the council staff, our videographer, everybody for being here. Thank you so much. I did want to acknowledge it's 9/11, and so I know that this is a day that is somber, and a lot of people have heavy hearts today, and so did want to acknowledge that and appreciate you joining us on such a solemn occasion. We do have the information of the other meetings that are here. I will say we heard from a lot of people with a very diverse set of viewpoints, which was the whole purpose and idea of doing this. So thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this community. And thank you for continuing to be part of this conversation as we move forward. As I mentioned, if you signed in, we will send information to you. Thank you. Have a good night. And out of respect for the Recreation Department, let's hear it for them. And please make your way out of the building so they can clean up and get home after a very long day. Thank you so much.